Yes, of course.
Welcome to another episode of Industrial Strength Podcast, a podcast more focused on the industrial fire department and industrial hazmat responses. My name is Jeff. I'm a hazmat technician with 20 years experience in the fire service, with 10 being on the industrial side. With me today are Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Well, I must be Tweedledum, so I'll go first, I guess. I'm Steve, a hazmat technician with 3 years of experience on an industrial response team and 10 years plus of experience in the industrial manufacturing setting.
Hey everybody, my name is Randy, hazmat specialist. I have 17 years on the industrial fire department, mainly doing hazmat.
What are we talking about today, Steve?
Well, today we're going to talk about that Code Red, and not Mountain Dew in this case. We're going to talk about that big red cloud in the sky that could form.
Not as delicious, no.
Mars? Possibly. I've never been there. Maybe more like Uranus.
That's more brown, not red.
Well, speaking of brown and red, we're going to talk about bromine, which can have both of those properties and characteristics. So, bromine's a heavy reddish-brown liquid that's easily volatile at room temperatures, creating red vapor with sharp, irritating odors. Kind of like some guys on this podcast, I know.
Oh, God.
So,
I got nothing yet.
What kind of things is bromine used in?
Yeah, so bromine's a common commodity chemical. It can be used in agricultural chemicals, be used for insecticides, herbicides. Water treatment's a very big one. It can be actually used to reduce mercury emissions. It can be used to produce pharmaceuticals, and can be used as a catalyst for production of plastics and rubbers. So a wide variety of things.
You got it?
Nope.
You're kind of turning that dark red of bromine.
Holy hell. Hey, Randy, this is a weird question, but you remember a couple episodes ago we were talking about mercury. You said this is mercury emissions.
Yeah.
I know you have two nasty chemicals, but how? I mean, could they interact with each other or eliminate each other?
So mercury is one of those chemicals that can make an amalgam, so it'll mix with other things pretty readily, and make a bond. And I think we talked about that, like when we talked about mercury cleanup. That some of the mercury spill kits has a powder and it forms a mercury amalgam. So bromine will react with mercury and it will actually make more of a solid, so it can knock it out of the air and trap it. And so this is more the mercury emissions. We're talking like more incinerators, that kind of thing. So they might use bromine to scrub it out.
I just trying to put two and two together, make myself sound a little dumber than what I am. So
no, man, you're spot on. You're spot on with the fact that bromine can hit with the hit with the mercury.
So even though
so even though we're talking stupid, but bromine is still very, very hazard. It's fatal if inhaled, swallowed, or even absorbed through the skin.
Yeah,
it's corrosive, just like brother, sister, chlorine?
Yeah.
I don't even know how they got. I know there's some relation there, isn't there?
They're all in the family.
I can't tell the gender at this day and age.
Yeah, we'll call it the little brother chlorine.
No, there you go. But it does cause severe burns, and eventually, like with the vapors, the irritation of the mucus, mucus of the mouth, nose, lungs, eyes. It also acts as an oxidizer. Contact with combustible materials, clothing. Now we were talking about shirts. Pre-show. That may cause fire.
Yep.
Is that what causes
Side
you
joke.
to pull off the shirt?
No, we're not going to do that. Nobody wants to do that. None.
Speaking of some more hazards, this particular chemical is highly toxic. It's IDLH, which, for those of you who are unaware, is immediately dangerous to life and health. It's actually got a limit of 3 parts per million. Now, speaking of that little brother chlorine in comparison, it's actually 10 parts per million.
Yeah,
So
I found that really surprising.
I wasn't too far off, see?
Yeah, I actually was very surprised that bromine was way more toxic than chlorine was. To me, I thought it would have been a little higher than chlorine's 10, but surprising nonetheless.
I actually prefer bromine in the hot tub as opposed to chlorine,
right?
But
that's a
bromine doesn't stay as stable as long.
Right, and then that's a great example where you might commonly find bromine more often. Is it's used to sanitize hot tubs instead of chlorine, like in pools.
Yep. So the time weighted average exposure limit for bromine is actually 0.1 parts per million. The total weighted average based on 8 hours. Yeah, that's not that much.
Yeah, really. 0.1 part per million is almost nothing. It's very easy to exceed that for almost any gas, right? So if you're talking about even like carbon monoxide, you'll find more than 0.1 part per million in the exhaust of your vehicle. So it's very, very little. And like when you're talking about like other things like that short-term exposure limit, which, I know it might be difficult if you don't work in industrial health or, EHS to memorize those terms, right? So the time weighted average, or STEL, the short-term exposure limit.
Yeah, but nobody wants to listen to people from EHS. Come on now.
I know. They're adjacent to hazmat. They're not typically hazmat. They're the long-term play where we're get in there and get the work done. But even that short-term exposure limit is real low. It's 0.2 part per million, but that's for 15 minutes. So, and then if you exceed that more than 4 times per day, you gotta go home. What's that?
I probably have that amount when I put that bromine in the hot tub. Fill up a canister.
Are you sitting there huffing it as you do it again?
What do you mean again? It's all the time, yeah. Clears out the nostrils.
Right.
So, the other thing I got a question here is we always count that short-term exposure limit based on an 8-hour working day. Mm-hmm. How many people actually only put in 8 hours a day anymore?
I know I don't.
Are you assuming that we put in 8 hours? Or are you saying people work more?
Okay, let me rephrase that in some terms that are more like you and me. Are physically on site at work, not necessarily working more than 8 hours.
Right, yeah.
Okay, fair
I think
enough.
that's a fair number of people. Right, so, unless you are truly shift work, and there are some places where they have that, right? Even in our facility, you have shift workers, but I think in the jobs that we all have, and especially first-line responders, it's not typically an 8-hour day. It's not so nice to punch in, spend 8 hours, kill 8 hours, punch out, and you're out. So I think you're right that day is excruciatingly longer.
I think I'd be bored of an 8-hour workday.
It's nice. I don't know, man. I did it for many, many years. I did it for like 9 years. It was nice. So
I showed up a couple hours late last week and put in 8 hours. It was pretty hard.
You poor baby. How do you do it?
Yeah, Randy, how do you do it?
It's simple. It's where I'm at with so many years in, you just don't care anymore. It's really easy. Every day is like, just don't care.
Vacation.
That's right. Let it roll over me like a wave. Whoosh.
That's another word I'm questioning. What
I know better.
Work?
Randy, I know better than you. Yeah. Yeah, that too.
All right, so back to our topic on hand.
Yes.
Wow. Now, bromine also reacts with water, and when it reacts with water, it converts into 2 molecules, which Randy might be able to speak to a little bit better, but I'm going to put it in layman's terms of HOBr and HBr.
Yeah. So bromic acid and hypobromic acid.
Come on, break it down for us, Randy.
Toxic.
Break
it down for us, Randy.
What's that?
Break it down for us.
So HOBr, hyperbromic acid, really unstable. Really is. So nerd out for 30 seconds.
Kind of like me.
Yeah,
Super
I know.
unstable.
I don't know about that. But so the bromine oxygen, like when you think about atoms, they're both negative. And so the only thing that balances it out is a single hydrogen, which makes that molecule extremely unstable. It wants to fall apart quickly. So you're not going to see that for very long. It's going to want to react with anything. And the HBr, the hydrobromic acid, that's much more stable. You can think about that like hydrochloric. But the fact that this creates two separate acids from the same thing is really kind of interesting. So there's like only a handful of things where it will react and form two separate acids at the same time instead of all kind of going one way or the other. So the HOBr is definitely the most unstable of the two. And it's interesting because they'll use that one for sanitizing. So because it falls apart and wants to react with the things in the water that are unclean. So typically that's why they use it and form it and make it. But there are other bromine compounds specifically used for water sanitization that isn't this hypobromic acid. So there you go. Off my soapbox, promise. So yeah, reaction with water is a big one. It's just like with the chlorine, right? Reacting with water makes a big reaction. I gotta imagine that once it hits that water, it's gonna also be.
Wow.
Yeah. Once it hits water, it's going to be exothermic.
Come on.
So talking about reactions. So like Jeff, how would we work on?
Make us react.
How would you work on neutralizing this? How would you work on neutralizing bromine?
Well, there's probably many different ways you could try, but I think sodium bisulfate. I believe that's just baking powder, baking soda.
Yep.
Fairly close, yep.
Yeah. You can quench it, small drips, and the leaks. 40% sodium bisulfate. Wow, that's hard. Solution for small drips
Sulfate
when disconnecting. Sulfite. What did I say?
You said sulfate to begin with, but both would work in that situation. It would do the same job.
See, both would work.
But did you know
I knew it. But then the decomposition, it reacts with water to generate hyperbromic acid. There's the HBr. I should have just said that. Which has an IDLH.
For you.
Yeah, well, again, that goes back to many issues. HBr, IDLH of 30 parts per million, and hyperbromous acid,
Bromus.
which is
Just say bromus.
what Randy said, which is used for a disinfectant.
Right.
So when you're in a chemical
Keep it up, and I'm going to get both of you back for those.
Go ahead. We're going to play a video here in a minute, but when you work in a chemical facility like ours, material composition of the equipment is very key in compatibilities with things such as bromine. Mm-hmm. So here's a video that we're going to play of bromine with aluminum in the air. Or aluminium.
Are you British?
Aluminum.
I'm very American. I go with aluminum.
That's crazy.
That is pretty.
Mm-hmm.
That's sparkler level pretty. And then you see all the bromine gas.
A little bit of air added to those two.
Yeah. Because once again, bromine's an oxidizer, right? So it oxidizes that aluminum. So, a beautiful thing.
Yep. So before
as long as it's happening in the test tube, not the plant.
Yes.
Remember the works and the aluminum foil back 30 years ago?
The works bombs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, put in a pop bottle. Yeah, it was used to blow
I've heard those are pretty impressive.
Yes.
I have heard that myself too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we get into our own personal calls that we've been on with bromine, we're going to cover some of the recent bromine events that have happened around the world. So the first one was, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I will butcher the town.
Oh, come on.
But over in Russia back in 2011, and we have a picture of this one as well. Now, in this case, some toxic fumes covered the entire rail site and city in which that railroad was in, of 1.1 million people, as well as the nearby town. I'm going to try this one, Kopiesk. After about 40 to 50 liters of bromine was spilled in a broken glass jar at a rail station. Now,
that's not that much, man. 40 to 50 liters? Like,
No,
so,
it actually isn't.
but
think about it,
look
it's
at
like
the
10
amount of
gallons?
cloud out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a 10-gallon release. That's crazy. Think about, like, the drums we deal with typically at, like, 55-gallon, if you get a drum of anything.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, now their biggest worries in this case were from ecologists and just from a population control standard, having figure out how to deal with this because it was so widespread. They didn't know what the long-term effects would be.
Right. You know, I got to imagine that, really breathing respiratory issues would be your biggest one, because after a while, it's all going to react away. So it's not like it's going to linger because it's just bromine so reactive, it's going to make compounds. But I think your biggest danger is like people breathing it in and having respiratory issues.
Oh, yeah.
Then we had one that hit a little closer to home, I believe maybe last year,
Sure enough,
if I'm not mistaken.
I think that was
we may have
late last
allegedly
year.
had one of our fire department members in the area for this.
Yes. So, you guys want to speak to this one?
Yeah, I don't mind. I'll take this one. So Conyers, Georgia, interesting place. Obviously, this cloud is much more interesting, right? Because of the telling color on it, right? Kind of brownish red. So it's either gonna be one or two things. It's either gonna be a nitric compound or a bromine compound, but in this case, it was bromine, right? And so that site produced chemicals that contained bromine. And what happened was they had a runaway reaction because they had a sprinkler line in their facility that broke, which not uncommon. It happens, right, through sometimes cold weather, but this was not cold weather. I think something struck it and broke it. But it leaked material. It leaked water onto this bromine-containing material, and it reacted. And when it went, once again, water and bromine are going to mix, react. It's going to go exothermic. It just started a runaway reaction, and it started a fire. And it took over that plant. They had to evacuate, and they had to shut down large swaths of that city. So it was a bad time. So that was that. And so, the really, I guess, the shameful part about this is this wasn't the first time that biolab facility had an issue. If I remember right,
they've been cited several different times.
Yeah, agreed. So this is just the most recent of those times, which really cut a giant hole in their facility with the fire and the chemical release.
Oh, yeah. And it certainly brought a lot of light on that facility. I think that's going to be under the spotlight for quite some time now.
I would agree, right? Anytime you release a giant colored vapor plume, it's going to get remembered.
It usually makes national news.
Yeah. Yeah, and this was not like a 1 hour event. It was like multiple days.
Yeah. Yep. So, those are two incidences throughout the world. We actually use this on our site.
Yes.
We use it in chemical synthesis in this case by charging into a dedicated feed tank where it's diluted into a desired concentration before it gets transferred to a specific volumes throughout the dedicated transfer line. And it's really at controlled rates to a reactor tank holding the immediate product. But nonetheless, we still have this. I mean, all this stuff is still a possibility.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, but, I mean, we've had issues with bromine because, once again, bromine is very corrosive, right? So it'll form bromic acid and hypobromic acid. And both of those are, once again, acids. They're corrosive. It'll eat away eventually, even if you have like the best steel tanks, right? If you have Manal or if you have, it doesn't matter what you have, eventually it's going to get eaten away by acid. So it's only a matter of time before you have failures.
So, no, we've actually had instances where it's eaten through Hastelloy as well, which is very strong metal.
Yeah.
But right now we're going to bring up some pictures of what our current configuration of bromine is that we receive on site in these massive cylinders that, as you can see, they're over 4 foot tall, about 4.5 feet tall, and almost 3 foot wide.
Yeah.
You got to use a forklift to get it off the truck and a very heavy, capable pallet jack.
Right. And this is different than this is different than the way we used to get bromine, right?
Yes.
So how long ago do you think that change occurred in like packaging?
So that was within the last decade. I want to say somewhere around 2019, actually.
Okay.
Give or take a year. Historically, we used to get this in little tiny drums that came in overpacks, and we used to call them the bromine kegs, which was cool because we would charge them just using a plain old hose with a short dipstick dedicated for this and vacuum right into the tank. And every time we got to charge it, you'd see red clouds come out of the bung cap on that drum, and it just roll over the side of that drum down onto the floor. So it was kind of cool to see from that perspective. Yeah. But due to DOT regulations, like we talked about with the corrosiveness of these, they deem those containers unsafe to travel by road, especially in the quantities that large manufacturing facilities like ours need. So they swap over these containers. No.
Right.
So now we use these, which the picture on the right shows are under the dome configuration, more of a top-up look, if you'll say. That you actually have 2 flange connections with isolation quarter turn valves underneath that you hook dedicated lines and flanges up to, and on the left there's actually a built-in relief valve on that in case it does overpressurize in transportation.
Nice. Yeah, it looks much more rigorous. I'm surprised that we get bromine like this, but chlorine is still acceptable for 1-ton cylinders. Yeah. Seems weird to me that maybe either the regulation hasn't caught up to chlorine or they're not considering the hazards equivalent.
So we did actually have a call on this. I believe it was probably summer 2024. Approximately 2:30 operations was performing a rinse of the bromine transfer line after completing one of their bromine additions using methylene chloride, another great chemical. Yep. During this rinse, 3 of the 4 bromine detectors in that area went into alarm. Readings on those detectors, I don't believe this exceeded 0.9, maybe 0.9 parts per million. And then it did return to 0 shortly thereafter. Operations did notify dispatch, requested hazmat at approximately 3 o'clock, so half hour later.
So now we'll cover those specific monitors that detected this near the end of our episode, but just to mention them now, those are a Draeger 7000 model detector specifically for bromine in this instance.
Yeah, so like an area monitor as opposed to like a specific handheld thing, right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So let's talk some PPE and bromine.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, we're going to choose.
We're talking about PPs, Jeff.
PPs, huh?
Let's talk about PPE.
What's our selection for the PPE?
So it looks like what we wound up doing. So we knew we had bromine, right? So bromine, you typically think like chlorine, it's an acid gas, it's a problem. So typically you would think like level A all the way, right? And that's the old standby for acid gases. But what we did is we wound up doing something a little different. If I remember correctly, we did go level B with SCBA and chem gloves. But part of that was because we altered the environment. So this is something that's phenomenal. But if I remember right, we actually used fans to change the
There
environment.
were fans, yes.
Yes.
So we pushed vapors away so we could work literally upwind of this in level Bs, so it wasn't as strenuous for our guys. Because once again, this is a summer call, and if any of you have ever been in a level A in the summer, that is brutal. It's absolutely brutal. You're gonna be pouring sweat out of your suit. So we opted to try and go level B, so it wasn't as brutal, and we did that by adjusting the environment by using forced air to change that environment for our responders that were working and having them work upwind.
Yep, and we actually also used another method in this that was kind of unique. You could call it a garden hose, but essentially there was dedicated water hoses in the production area that we used to spray down, knock down any of those vapors. As we spoke of earlier, that reacts and creates much less toxic elements of bromine.
You're right.
With that, and
once again,
the fans on top of it.
Yeah, because once you hit that bromine gas with water, it's going to react like we talked about. It's going to form two different acids, but both those acids are liquid. And what's a level B
I'd
good
rather
for?
have that than have
Liquids.
something in the air.
Agreed, 100%. So, yeah, so that worked out really well for us. So we changed it twice. We forced air to remain upwind, and then we used the water to convert it to a liquid, which is much more appropriate for level B. And then, Steve, if I remember right, the building that we're working in, they actually had specialty meters for our responders to work on or work with, correct?
That is correct. They have specialty personnel monitoring devices that can be worn. I believe they have like 4 of them in the building currently for operators to use when they're in the area and non-active charging operations are going on with the bromine. So they actually lent those to us so we could attach one of those to entry team 1 as well when they went in. And again, we'll talk about that meter a little more in detail at the end, but that's a Draeger 8000 meter. So Draeger does make a lot of specialty meters that can be used in multiple applications for us. And here's a picture of that specific monitor right there.
Yeah.
We'll talk more on that a little later.
Right. And so that was nice because then we could prove that, without that meter going off, our guys weren't seeing the bromine gas, which would have meant they needed level A's, right? So it's a way of proving that they were safe in the level of garment that we sent them in at, that the modifications we made in the environment were successful in working. So then what do we do?
What was our initial plan?
Well, due to the location of all 3 detectors that had gone off into alarm, and as well as the knowledge of the operations being formed when that incident occurred, it was believed that most likely that source of the leak was from an isolated area up on the first, or down on the first floor actually, and it would have either come from leaking pipe flange, or the hose connection. Entry Team 1 did enter the building with the necessary meters and tools to both pinpoint and mitigate the leak. For the tools that we would have used, probably would have been the meters, wrenches, maybe something for the gaskets, both to remove them and reinstall them. Actually,
Right, yeah, because if I remember right, the valving for the piping is supposedly a dry close valve. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, so
Like
we'll
Epsilon?
actually show a picture of that. I think we have that. It's called the Dry Link. It's made by a few different companies, but under one general patent. It's called an Epsilon valve. So in this case, it's a pipe coming out of the bottom of the tank with a quarter turn isolation valve and a dry link fitting to connect another hose to.
Yeah.
In this instance, the hose was hooked up for rinsing the line with chloride after the transfer line itself had been blown clear of the bromine, and just the residual amount of probably a few drops of bromine that had washed back into this leg of the piping leaked out of that fitting and down onto the floor, giving enough off that it set alarms off throughout the area.
yeah. So the cleanup of that was pretty simple. I believe about a half hour into this, the entry team confirmed diluted bromine solution leak at one of the dry link, like you said. The spill material was mitigated using spill pads from Pig Pad. Mm-hmm. Pig Pad? Huh? No comment?
Them a time or two before.
We sure have.
And then there's also water to dilute the solution. Entry Team 1 then proceeded to replace the gasket on the dry link fitting and pressure check the pressure or the transfer line to ensure that there were no more further leaks. And the building was returned to operations around 5 o'clock. So, hour and a half
later.
or so. Yeah.
Yeah, not too bad.
So
I think we saw the
terrible call.
No.
It wasn't too bad. It wasn't very hot, if I remember correctly.
No, as far as summers go, it wasn't terrible. But still, anytime you got to get in a suit, right, you're praying to God it's not tipping above 72.
Yeah.
I can't speak for those who are standing outside in the sun, but it was fairly warm inside.
Yeah.
I believe I did get a sunburn on my head.
That's right, you did.
See,
That's only one of the times.
I had level B PPE to protect myself from that sun.
Yeah. So I think we've already seen one of our meters here, the Draeger Polytron 7000. But then there's also the Draeger Pack 8000. I think we have pictures of both of those.
Yep. So the Polytron 7000 is a fixed meter.
The little portable personal one?
No, this is actually the area monitoring
There.
one.
Okay. The
Yep.
big square one.
So
Okay.
these can be mounted in various applications. They're typically used, like I say, as area or room monitoring sensors, and they can meet almost any type of toxic gas or oxygen measurement applications in a single platform.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the picture we're seeing now, that's the Draeger Pack 8000. That's your personal meter. It does a pretty good job. That's what I think 4 of the people were wearing. The employees were wearing. So,
Yep. Good personal monitor. And then there's that area monitor.
yep. So, share your thoughts, experiences. Have any requests for future episodes? Talk about any incidences that you've had at your facility. How do you contact us, Randy?
hazmatharder@gmail.com. And then for next episode, we're going to be talking about the dangers about peroxides and peroxide solids. So reach out, talk to us, let us know what you thought. Let us know if you use bromine in your facilities, if you had any issues with that. But until then, stay tuned. Catch us next time.
Hazmat Harder.
Hazmat Harder.